Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are taking a look at the week 11 matches for the Overwatch League, my picks and how I did with all that. So let's jump into it. Let's take a look at the picks I made last week. My overall record is 7-2, 2-0 on the big picks, so finally got a good weekend for those. Thursday, the matches went about exactly as expected. The Reign 3-0 victory over the Justice, easy for them. Reign look very good. Justice, don't. Gladiators Valiant was a 3-2 series. It was very close. Almost a reverse sweep by the Valiant, but the Gladiators shut them down. The Valiant running an Ashe composition, which was very interesting. We don't see a lot of Ashe in general, so it was interesting to see it. And we did see some more Ashe when it came to the Chinese matches. So the Chengdu Hunters run some Ashe pretty effectively. Saturday and Sunday, so that was an interesting one to see. The Thursday matches, though, were pretty straightforward. Ashe thing. It was an interesting series to watch, the Gladiators versus the Valiant. It was pretty close, but the Valiant are a team right now that I look at, and they seem to struggle against these teams. They can't close out series or whatever it may be, and they've been on a really major skid. So I need to see some more from the Valiant. Right now, they're at the bottom of the Pacific Conference. So I need to see a lot more from them to see if they even have a shot at being a team contending for the title. Because they're pretty low in the standings right now, and they have some work to do to get up there. Moving on to Friday, we have the Florida Mayhem beating the Paris Eternal, which was a very interesting match. A lot of credit to the Florida Mayhem. They looked very good. They looked very clean. But I also don't think Paris looked all that great. But I also think that that's just Paris. I think we've been hyping up Paris a ton, and we've been talking about Paris a ton and how good they are. You know, they beat Philadelphia. They've had close series with Philadelphia after that. I think we look at this team as a team who we think is a top team in the league, but I'm starting to wonder if that's actually the case. I think they're a very competitive team. I think they match up well against Philadelphia, but I don't know how good Paris really is, because right now in the standings, yes, they're 5-4 +1, but technically in the standings they're in 4th in the Atlantic now. Sorry, 5th in the Atlantic now. They're behind the Spitfire, who are in 4th, and then the Reign, the Excelsior, the Fusion, who are 3-2-1. And the Fusion, being how close they played against the Eternal, it's the kind of thing where that bumps up what you think of the team. But the Paris Eternal, they've lost to the Fusion, they've lost to the Mayhem, they've lost to the Outlaws, they've lost to the Defiant. They don't have great losses. Now, they haven't lost to Justice or Uprising, but they lost to the 3 teams right below them in the standings, and the only team above them in the standings that they've beaten is the Fusion. So I'm less sold on the Eternal after this weekend, because we've seen them lose other matches, right, to teams that aren't great in convincing fashion. Mayhem was a 3-0 loss. Outlaws was a 3-0, I think. Defiant was a 3-1. I mean, these are some pretty one-sided series for the Paris Eternal. Now, the Defiant one was week 1. They didn't have their whole roster available to them. Hanbin couldn't play. There's a lot that goes into the Paris Eternal one. Against the Defiant, it's a different roster, somewhat. So that one's kind of understandable. But I have some questions about the Eternal after this weekend. And I think the Mayhem are a better team than what people give them credit for. I think if you look at the Atlantic Conference, in terms of overall skill and talent, they're kind of close with London, I think. I think you would look and say Fusion, Excelsior, Reign, Eternal, your top 4, and then Spitfire, Mayhem in some order are there, and then probably Defiant, Outlaws, Justice, Uprising. Or Outlaws, Defiant. I guess Outlaws look a little better than Defiant. So it was an interesting week for that match in particular. I think the Mayhem proved that they are actually a pretty respectable team, and that they can beat some of these teams that we look at as stronger teams. When you look at the Mayhem schedule, they've played a lot of very tough teams. Their losses are to New York and Philly and Atlanta and London, but they beat the Eternal in a pretty convincing fashion. I'm interested to see what the Mayhem do going forward, to see what they do in their next couple matches. We don't know what their next match is. There's no schedule for next week out yet, but I'll be curious to see what happens. Moving on, Toronto Defiant beat the Boston Uprising. A very expected result. The Defiant looked okay. They didn't look great. Uprising looked what the Uprising looked like. The Uprising are an embarrassment. They're a laughing stock. I mean, there's so much you could say, and this is nothing against the players. Okay, right? The players are doing what they can with what they're given, and that's really like all there is to it. You look at the team, the Boston Uprising, right? They only have 6 players right now who are eligible to play. Now, the reason why they only have 6 is partly for, a number of different reasons. Primarily that Axiom is back in Korea for it. He had a surgery or some kind of health issue, so he's not able to play right now. But that would be their only other player, right? They don't have anybody else, right? The starting 6 is who they got, right? So they have to run Jerry and Color Hex, they have to run Fusions and Brucin, and they have to run Halo and Myunbong. Now Myunbong, very highly sought after player. Color Hex and Jerry, I actually think have been one of the bright spots for this team. But I think you have to really be looking to invest more in, even more into your DPS, more into your tanks, more into your main support line, because the team isn't performing well, right? Huck, you gotta criticize the man, because his strategy of going cheap and building a good roster hasn't worked for 2 straight years, right? It has not worked. The Boston Uprising are a bad team. They were the worst team in the league last season. They are going to be the worst team in the league again this season at this rate. They aren't very good. They need to fix what they have going on because it isn't working. And I don't care what you say about some of the things that have happened in the past with the Uprising. They don't matter when the team can't win anymore. So the Uprising need to make some changes. They need to bring in some more players. They need to actually be willing to spend money on really well-known good players in contenders or from the Overwatch League, because this is an embarrassment and you can't just keep doing this week in and week out, season in and season out, where you just don't succeed and you just say, okay, well, let's just do it all again, because it's not working. And you have to admit that it isn't working and you have to make some changes. Final match from Friday was the San Francisco Shock narrowly beating the Dallas Fuel. The Dallas Fuel have looked very good in the past several weeks. They are a team who is actually a threat and a contender in the Pacific. I don't think they're going to be the team that wins the finals, but I think they are right now. They look like a team that could compete for the playoffs. Now it's difficult for them, because they are in such a tough area. They have to play the Shock and the Gladiators and the Valiant, who they have beaten the Valiant, right? Which technically those are the only teams in the Pacific right now, are the Shock, Gladiators, Fuel, and Valiant. But the Fuel also have been playing some Atlantic teams, which they should beat a lot of these Atlantic teams. They played the Justice. They should be able to beat the Uprising. They should be able to beat the Outlaws. They should be able to beat the Defiant. Possibly the Mayhem, possibly the Spitfire. Who knows? With the way things are going, you just kind of have to judge them based on the week-to-week schedule, because you never know who they're going to play, because everything is so up in the air and so weird. But the Fuel looked pretty good, and it was really Dohan Decay playing very, very well. I thought Gamzu had a good series, and I thought Note had a pretty good series. The whole team had a good series, honestly. It was just the Shock managed to pull it off in the end, and you got to give Dallas credit where credit's due. They have made the changes that they have actually needed to get the roster to where they needed it to be. And I think that it is a much better look for this Dallas Fuel roster than we have ever really had. So it's very good, and I'm not a Dallas Fuel fan personally. Um, I know that there are Dallas Fuel fans, a lot of them, and I think it's good to see that the team is actually putting in the work to be a lot better. Moving on to Saturday and Sunday, we had only the matches in the Chinese region, or the Asian region, but the matches were specifically all Chinese teams. Chengdu Hunters, dominant win over the Guangzhou Charge. Very, 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 very one-sided affair. It was very interesting to see. And then the Dragons, very one-sided series against the Spark. I mentioned this last weekend, or last week, or last Thursday when I made my picks video, that I thought this would be a bad week for the Spark, because it is not a hero pool that works for them, which it was true. It was not a great hero pool for them. Against the Dragons, they drew a map, so that was the best they did. The Spark were just not able to really do a lot this week, and it really showed against the Charge, because the series against the Charge was very one-sided. It was 3-1 in favor of the Charge, but the Spark had no answers for Nero's Pharah. They just couldn't do anything about it. No McCree, no Widowmaker. It was very difficult for them to find a way to deal with the Pharah, and they struggled a lot with that. So you feel for the Spark because it wasn't a really hopeful for them. They didn't look great either, which was interesting. I've been very high on the Spark. I've been saying they're the second best team in the region. I mean, at this rate, it doesn't really matter who's the second best team in the region. Like, it's Shanghai and everybody else. It doesn't really matter until we start seeing teams like Seoul and New York and Vancouver and London start playing matches again against these teams, and we start to see more of what the Spark and the Charge and the Hunters and even the Dragons are capable of against teams outside of these four teams. I mean, obviously, we've seen the Charge and the Hunters play the Titans, but we haven't seen them play the Spitfire or the Dynasty or the Excelsior. When we start to see some of these teams actually match up against each other, we'll have a lot more to know about these teams. But like the Dragons look really good. I mean, against the Hunters, they didn't play Stand 1. They played Fearless. They played Ding instead of Fleta, and they played Luffy instead of Izayaki, and they were still dominant. Now, obviously, they're all Overwatch League caliber players. Like, you'd expect them to be very good. Ding was a role star from last season and arguably an MVP candidate who got robbed of being an MVP candidate. Luffy was on the team last season. He was their starter last season, and Fearless is a player who was going to be their main tank last season until his whatever happened. I don't remember if it was health or something of that matter, and they brought in Gamsu. This Shanghai Dragons team is very, very good. They looked very good against the Spark. They looked very good against the Hunters. And the Charge struggled against the Hunters. The Charge dominant against the Spark. The Spark really were the big team that struggled this past weekend in this region. But it's going to be an interesting region to watch. And I want to see more matches out of this region as more teams start to show up in this region. Because we know that Vancouver is over there. Seoul is likely over there. London is over there. NYXL is likely over there. So we're going to start seeing hopefully more matches out of this region. I would hope that means maybe we can get some more matches in that region, right? So we're not just seeing 4 matches every weekend. We're seeing 6 to 7, even 8 matches, because there's going to be that many teams out there, right? There's 8 teams out there. So that's enough for 4 matches a day in that region. Your Pacific region now only has 4 teams. Atlantic, you still have a good number of teams. I think there's still 18 teams. Not 18 teams. 8 teams in the Atlantic. So you still have a number of teams in all these regions. It's just a matter of where they are able to get matches done. But that's it for my picks for last weekend. I did pretty well. There's a couple things that weren't the best, but all in all, pretty good. Real quick, let's take a look at the overall standings, or the conference standings. We have league standings or something that we'll take a look at as we get closer to the end of the season. But look at the conference standings. things pretty much the same at this point in time, with the exception of the Eternal dropping down below the Spitfire, and they may have also dropped below the Rain from last weekend. I don't remember if they were ahead of the Rain or not. I don't think they were, actually. I think they only dropped below the Spitfire. But the Spitfire haven't played since week 5, if not earlier than that. So we haven't seen the Spitfire in a long time. We haven't seen the Excelsior in a long time. So there's some teams we haven't seen in a while who I would love to get to see more of, just so we know what's going on. But standings look pretty much where you'd expect them to look. We'll just have to wait and see what happens more as we get closer to middle of the season, and hopefully the second half of the season when teams start to play more, and hopefully we get through all this quarantining and social distancing, and enough time that we can get some matchups between teams that haven't played and that won't play, right? Like maybe we get to see NYXL play against Atlanta, NYXL play against San Francisco, play against Valiant and Gladiators and Dallas. Who knows? I think all the teams that are moving into the Asian region are going to have a bit of difficulty, at least early on. We'll see what happens as things change, but it is a crazy week to see what happens, and a crazy time in general. Everything's just kind of up in the air, but we still get Overwatch League, and that's really what matters most. So I'm just going to enjoy what we have because it's pretty good. But that's everything I have for you today. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more stuff like this in the future. Hope you all have a wonderful week. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Hope you're all staying safe, staying inside, and I will see you all next time. So thank you once again, and bye-bye.